Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. All right. All right. So it's time for the interactive section. Now, there are multiple ways in which we can do this. But first, I want to hear your thoughts about this basic idea. The world is a stage. Will you play? Just any opening statements that you would like to make. What are your thoughts about just taking the initiative and doing things as opposed to not doing things? The relationship between the dance between expression, between speaking and listening, between expression and consuming, like producing versus consuming. Any thoughts on this? Go ahead. We'll start with Joe and Jeff. Joe.
So one of the main things that it was a great presentation, Mike, by the way, but it was one of the things that I think that why this topic's important is because you can develop empathy more than anything else. I think that that's my main kind of takeaway. If you're just consuming and you're not trying, then you're kind of just out there and you don't know necessarily what it takes to do something. So I could sit here and criticize anybody that presents, but if I have never presented myself, I don't know what that process is actually going like, what it's the work that it entails, where I maybe had to, kind of improve, or what I had to work on in that process. So I think participation is actually critical in developing empathy. I think, many times, if you think about it in terms of, and I brought this up, I've heard many times people, criticize people for failing, at a business or something along those lines, or even criticize people that were successful in business. But I never heard somebody that's failed in business criticize the person that's been successful, because they actually know what the process is in order to achieve a certain degree of success, whatever that's, whatever you're considering it to be. And so that's why I think it's important to try as many different things as possible, whether it be teaching, whether it be dancing, whether it be these things, is because it develops a certain appreciation for them that you would never otherwise have.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I like 3 points, empathy, building of empathy, actually putting yourself in other person's shoes in order to dance, if you will, and kind of tolerance for failure, and that being, failure is natural, and trying more things as a way of expanding. Beautiful. Next up is going to be Jeff, followed by Vanessa. Jeff. Just a second.
So I got it on. I'm going to build a little bit on what Joe said. So a couple of my favorite axioms are: when all is said and done, a lot more will be said than done. And also that there's nothing that works in theory that stinks in practice. If it stinks in practice, it stinks in theory, which was a favorite line of my economics professor at college. And I think that one of the dangers of conversation that doesn't lead to, at the very least, kind of experimental action is that somewhere in that process, it gets out of balance, where it's just endless consideration of possibilities without actually trying anything out. And so, among the things, just sort of in a simple way, that I often do with teams facing, wicked problems or complex opportunities, is this, process of aspiring to generate some positive outcome, either benefits or an experience, and looking and, see what's really going on and orienting what's most important, and ideating approaches and deliberating them and sort of radical pro-con consideration. And then, just, using a weighted factors system to make some decisions, and then, maybe prototyping and acting, applying something. But of all those steps, the most important step that I've discovered is learning the best things from whatever happened so that you actually can keep moving forward. And this idea of the reason for all that stuff is what you're trying to do is give yourself an opportunity to learn the best things from trying something out. And so this orientation, this bias towards action and expression, in order to then feel it and get it and understand it and try it out and learn the best things. And there are a lot of different things people learn, even opposite things from the same experience. So I really mean learning the best things from experience. Learning the best things can only happen if you actually try out whatever it is that sounds like a good idea. And so that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff. I like very much the thinking of this in terms of the OODA loop, that you're basically, unless you have this loop of you're observing, orienting, deciding, and acting, and once you act, you are looking at the results of the action. The world keeps changing around you. What other people are doing keeps changing around you. What you're doing, your actions are going to change things. And then you're taking all of that experience back, you're reorienting yourself, you're deciding and acting. And that loop you can't have without the action. So that decision and action is a critical part of that. Thank you. Next up is Vanessa, followed by Allison. Vanessa, what is this dance between expressing and listening?
Well, I thought you asked slightly different, but sometimes there's also thinking like you're on a stage even if there's no audience. I took dance classes. If they said, if you think you can dance, I'll be like, no, you can't, but you enjoy the process. The Rockettes, I'll be singing, start spreading the news and doing the Rockette kit of going down a huge escalator. And sometimes you see other people like, oh my, look at this. Or you say, oh, and I'll be like, oh, you join in. Or even like singing, like in the living, this guy's looking around and he's like, thinking, wait, they're like speakers in this hallway now. And they're like, oh my gosh, you have a really good voice. But I think, you can bring other people into it and realize, okay, you love doing it. And also maybe the failures, and people realize, wait, you can laugh at your failures. I was trying to carry a bunch of stuff. I tripped. They thought I was crying and I was laughing at myself thinking, okay, I tried too much too quickly or misjudged something. And that may give you the courage to try something else or invite someone else in. We're like, oh my gosh, she is the worst, whatever it is, but she's still going out there and doing it. Either she enjoys it or realizing what's the big deal if I fail, I'm not like the president. It's not like a life critical thing. So you may bring others enjoying, but I think it's definitely, you get more out of life and more out of each day, and maybe realize strengths that other people didn't realize they had, or you underestimated them, or you're underestimating yourself, and realize, my gosh, people are enjoying this. They're getting something out of this. So maybe my singing gave them joy, and I'm not going to be buying any records. Don't make a career out of it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vanessa. We'll go to Allison, and then after that, everybody gets a chance to put any question that they want on the table regarding this general topic. All right, and we'll take all the questions and we'll all try to answer them. Allison, your thoughts?
So if you think that you should step into someone's shoes, they're right here. Feel free. Go right ahead. Well worn. Well, one thing that this was making me think about was that I went to this high school reunion, and they had the DJ and the dance floor, and the dance floor just sat there empty because, I hadn't seen these people in so long, and nobody wanted to get out there. And so this one guy, he goes out there alone and just dances by himself for 10 minutes. And finally, we all jump on, and then the party's going and everyone's dancing. And I asked him afterwards, I was like, I was like, I'm a dancer. Well, I don't have the courage to get out there alone. how did you do that? And he said, well, I did it because it's always been my phobia to dance in front of people. So I decided that in order to conquer that phobia, I had to be the first person out there. And he said, so anytime I'm in a wedding, any situation, I go first. And then it made me get over the fear. And he really like got everybody out there because of that. And so I don't know. I think I mean I was telling my group about this. So I had this teacher at the Graham School who said that the only thing in dance that you can't teach is this ability to be, there's this place when you're not on balance, but you haven't fallen down yet. And you're like in free fall. And she said that that's the only thing you can't teach. And some people will go there on a regular basis. And some people, if it's not in them, they never do it. And I have always been that person, you know, I trip, I fall, and it's funny because I talked to a good friend of mine that I grew up with who's led a very kind of safe sort of life. And mine has not been that way. And I said, I feel like I fail at everything. And she's like, no, you don't fail at everything. You just try for far more things than your average person would try. But I really, like, when I look at my life, I just think the very best things I've ever done were the things that I did that absolutely terrified me, like up all night, terrified to do them. And I didn't succeed at all of them, but I feel like those led to the very best things I've ever experienced. And then like the last thing I want to say about this is, so a week ago, I was in LA visiting family. My son was with me. We come home. He suddenly announces, because his friend lives out there, he's in college there, but lives here. Mom, I want to fly back to, and now, okay, in a week, we're leaving to go to Greece for 2 weeks. He goes, I want to fly back to LA, get in the car with my buddy and drive across the country. And I'm like, no, you don't have time. You don't have time. We've got our plane to catch. And he's like, no, Mom. And he plotted out this whole route. And I finally went, you know what? You're only 21. All right, go, just go. So he did. He literally got on a plane yesterday, flew there. Then they drove 8 hours to Bryce Canyon. Now they're in Arches National Park. At least I think so. I haven't heard from him. I have to check. But I think, you know what? I thought the thing I thought of was, I was like, oh my God, he's just like me. Like, it's totally the thing I would have done at that age. But I just think it's great. I think if you don't take these chances, you're not going to wake up and see the sunrise over Bryce Canyon. You know, like you have to do it. If you're not really living, you're just not. So take a chance, live. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Allison. Next, we're going to take any questions. So just any questions that you have about this topic. Doesn't matter what questions. Let's get all the questions on the table, and then we'll try to answer as many of them. All of us will try to answer the questions. So go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to raise a question. We'll start with Vanessa, followed by Joe. Vanessa, what's your question?
Well, something indirectly, what about the role of, let's say, the producer or someone behind the stage that is maybe doing both at the same time, but it's throwing it out for others?
No, I'm sorry, I did not understand it. Can you repeat the question?
Well, what about like take it slightly different, either the producer, the director, that's, you know, both considering the audience. So it's not directly, you know, he's directing others to do it, but, you know, the participation like on the sidelines of the stagehand that may enhance it.
Got it. Okay. So production in that capacity. Wonderful. Thank you. Joe, what's your question?
I'm just, you know, I thought it was a good question. Actually, when I hit exclamation point, I'm not so sure now. But let me just try. Maybe just, how do you determine success?
Okay.
I think that's, you know, that's not an easy thing to do. Like where you're trying something, you know, what is your measure that you're actually using? That's
success measure. Excellent. Next up is going to be Kevin, followed by Mike A. Kevin.
My question about participation and sharing. What's your own thought? Why we need it, or, you know, anyway, about anything about participation and sharing? Thank you.
Participation and sharing. Very good. And sharing. Wonderful. Mike.
Yeah, I'd like to answer or have answers to the question of the night. Do you believe that all the world is actually a stage? Or where is your figurative stage in your life?
Wonderful. Where is your stage? Okay. Next up is Camellia. Camellia, go ahead.
No, I have a comment if someone can just chime on the fact that wouldn't it be selfish if you're constantly the actor, and are you not are you exchanging with the world if you're always the actor?
Wonderful, wonderful. Acting and exchanging with the world. Wonderful, excellent. Anybody else wants to put a question on the table? Otherwise, we'll go through all these questions. Okay, so we're going to start. If you have questions now, from now on, just put a question mark in the chat if you want to add a question to the list of questions that we have. So let's take the last question first. If you're always expressing yourself, are you being unfair to the world? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to answer. Evanique.
If you're always expressing yourself, I think it depends on, are you paying attention to the other person? Like in theater, we used to always say you can always tell if you're getting your point across or if something is coming across by your audience. So you have to pay attention to your audience. So I guess the answer to the question is no, if you're paying attention to your audience and you're seeing, like, you know, what emotion your audience is emoting. Like, you know, are they getting what you're saying? Are they getting what you're trying to express? If you're not paying attention, you'll just be expressing yourself or talking or whatever you're doing, and people don't get it. And then that's when you either shift. But if you're not paying attention to your audience, then yeah, that expression becomes too much because you're just only concerned about yourself.
So I will answer this because I made a comment regarding this. The way I think about it is Louis Sullivan's expression. Life began to break in on him, and a continuous process of breaking in from the outside and breaking out from the inside was to shape his destiny. So when I talk about expression, it is the expression of that kind. You're continuously taking in at the deepest level you possibly can from life and people around you. And you're taking all of that in, you're making it your own, and you're expressing it as best as you can. And if you're doing that, I think that's the best thing you can do for the world. It is the best thing you can do for yourself. It's the best thing you can do for the world, because you're actually, it's like it's validating the other person. You're actually listening to them at the deepest level you possibly can. And then you're saying, this is my response to you. And then you're hearing them back. And then you're saying, this is my response to you. So there is this loop of expression. So but the way I see it is that we are living beings. We act. That is our primary purpose. That's our primary function. Listening is a way of understanding how you need to act, where you are acting, and that the result of it has to be an expression, and that is actually producing value. It's like you're creating something new for the world. So that's how I see it. Next up is Allison, Joe, Devane, Vanessa, and Mike. Allison.
I think, it's funny because I've actually asked, in any classroom, there's always like one kid that wants to talk all the time. They just need to be the center of attention. And I actually will ask him, I'm like, aren't you tired of it yet? Like, aren't you exhausted? Because I mean, one, I think they should be quiet sometimes so that you can hear the other people speak. But also, I don't really get it because that's where my introversion comes in. Like, I can perform and then I am done. I need to be off stage. Like, I don't want to speak to anyone for 3 hours. So I have no idea what it's like to want to be the center of attention 24/7. It's just exhausting to me, you know. But also I feel like there's a point where you're not taking any new information, and if you're only listening to yourself, so it doesn't make sense to me. But some people seem to need that more than others. So,
Wonderful. Thank you, Allison. Next up is Joe, followed by Devane. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and you cleared it up for me by defining act, what is it? It's an active process just to listen as well as participating and speaking. If you look at it from that perspective as a loop, then I don't think that you're expressing yourself too much, because you're participating and there's this relationship that you have with other people. There's no self without other, so to speak. That's the way I would look at it. However, I would say if you're looking at it as just expressing yourself, and constantly expressing yourself, I don't think that that's sustainable or possible. And I have been around people that have expressed themselves quite a bit, and yeah, they end up speaking to themselves in the end because nobody else wants to listen. So I do think that there is a strike price, so to speak, where you can that you have to come to. Anyway, that's just a thought.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. These are very, very interesting observations. Thank you. I particularly like Allison's observation about difference between introverts and extroverts. And then Joe's observation here. So let's get all the observations. Next up is Devane, Vanessa, and Mike. Devane.
Okay, there I go, I think. I agree with what the last speaker said. I was thinking, when a child is born, they are, in my mind, for all practical purposes, an empty vessel. And by their nature, they pull in everything from everyone around them. And as they grow, they bring in those experiences and those thoughts, and they meld them together in their own way. And occasionally, maybe they add something original of their own. And then they express themselves. And that interchange. So I guess what I'm saying is it possible? Is it theoretically possible for a person to only express themselves? Yes. But I can't imagine it happening in practice. Just because if all you ever did was express yourself, was send things out of yourself, then the well that you have to draw from is so incredibly shallow that people would grow bored with you in moments and walk away. There has to be an interchange for you to pull in more information. If getting attention is your only interest, then you have to have new material to get attention with. And that's going to come from other people.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Devane. Next up is Vanessa, Mike, and George. Vanessa.
Well, I think if you take that to the extreme, like the actor performer, like on stage, that is like a stage hog, is looking for affirmation, they're actually robbing themselves, because it may cheapen the show, or it weakens the experience. Or even you've got that kid that wants it more the validation or getting all the stars and the stickers. And if you get the feedback from other people, realize, wait, maybe I didn't make my point the way I wanted to. And even if you go to a concert and the person wants to spotlight them 24/7, they got the background singer, the dancers, it enriches it when you've got maybe the interaction, or they point out someone, even if they're joking, or they were like off step or something, like the interplay. And you may think, well, it was a great set, the singing was great, but I didn't even realize this person said this person was doing such and such. So I didn't get the whole experience because that person wanted the spotlight on them 24/7. So they're actually robbing themselves.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vanessa. Next up is Mike, followed by George. Mike.
Yeah, this topic I enjoyed thinking about a lot. It's a great question. It's really about the balance of how much you're producing or consuming. So if it sounds like you're expressing yourself too much, I don't think it's anything detrimental to the world or to the audience. I think it's a disservice to yourself. Because if you're that expressive, that means you're putting in the time for your craft. You should be able to take a time out and be on the other side, to spend some time in the audience, kind of carefree. So I think it's more of a disservice to that person that's out of balance much than it is the audience.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Next up is George.
Thanks. I want to give a different spin on expressing, because it seems that whenever, for example, we're reading a book or listening to someone, we are expressing, because these thoughts are coming into our minds all of the time. And so like the distinction, I think, is that it's not that we're not expressing, it's that we're not sharing our expressions with others. And yes, I think there are many advantages to sharing with others to get their input, because I think, two heads are better than one in many cases. But, you can live a very contemplative life, like a monk or something, or talking with God, and be expressing to yourself or God. And that can be a very full expression also.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. I want to do a follow-up question to kind of explicate, various points that were presented, talking about, you'd be listening to yourself, being more introspective or more introverted, the observation about a child, the crucial importance of kind of interchange, hogging the spotlight. So let me put it as a question. What is the proper relationship between speaking and listening, between expression and taking in of stuff? So let me phrase it this way. When I think about expression, it is a good expression if it does something positive in the world. And the only way it can do that is that if it is based on tremendous amount of listening. And then even when you express yourself, you're listening back. So what is the relationship? What do you think is a proper relationship between speaking and listening, between expressing yourself and taking in? What is the function of each of them? What is the function? So for example, even when you see a child, the child is born with certain reflexes, like the suckling reflex, the kicking reflex, which actually get them started. And then they start taking in stuff using those reflexes. And then they keep building their ability to act, because they have to act. Even to drink milk, they have to act. So go ahead and put an exclamation mark if you would like to talk about the, how do you see what is the proper relationship? Let's look at it in the context of a conversation, and then maybe we can expand it to other things. What is the role of speaking and listening in a conversation? What is a good conversation when you're thinking about the ratio of it? Is it right to think of it as a ratio? How do you think, or what is the relationship? Because it doesn't have to be time-based. You can put it in, think of it in a broad way. When you think of conversations which you say, okay, this was a good conversation, what do you notice? Do you notice any patterns about the connection between between speaking and listening? We'll start with Joe, followed by George.
I don't know if there's a ratio per se, because I think each conversation is unique in its own right? Each one takes a life of its own. I would like to, so the example of the airport, where you asked the individual that was about teaching languages, which is a really cool, really cool story. You were consuming, right? The ratio was inevitably, he's telling you about what he does and how, he thinks about things. And that was a great conversation. You learned from him. So that was one example. But I can honestly say that, that many of our conversations I like to try and take in more. And I'm just talking about you and I like to take in more because I like to benefit from your knowledge. So I think the ratio changes based on the dynamic of it. I think coming back to one of the practical points that we made the other night that Jeff and had spoken about as well, I think one of the most important parts about speaking in this process is that it's clarification of the other person's ideas. So it's kind of using that tactic of repeating what they were saying. I think that that's a really important role. Like, so that the idea of questions and speaking, and so that you're making sure that you fully understand what the person is trying to articulate. And I think that's but those are just some of my initial. I don't know if it's a ratio per se.
No, I mean, I'm not saying the ratio. I mean, that was just stuff that I put forth.
No, yeah, it's just throwing it.
So I mean, one formulation that Mark Stallman uses, which I like very much, is that audience is the formal cause of your speaking. So when you're speaking, you're always focused on saying, whom am I speaking to? What is their context? Am I saying something? And you have to use the feedback continuously in order to figure out whether you're actually, because it's not just about, producing sounds in the air. You're actually speaking to somebody, and you're actually doing something only if the other person gets it. Otherwise, you're not doing anything. That's not speaking. That is that you're not doing anything and in order to do that, you need to really know the audience and really listen to what they are saying. That's the only way you can actually speak. So I see that as a loop. Next up is George, Vanessa, and Jeff. George.
Yes, thank you. I think within the context of conversations, I think we may want to acknowledge that perhaps the vast majority of us like to express ourselves, like the opportunity to express ourselves. So if that's correct, then I think, the ideal in conversation may be a balance, to not talk any more than you're listening or vice versa. I think that kind of balance, I've been an introvert all my life, and for some reason my life has directed me to people that talk and don't stop, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating. So yes, I think the Socratic method was successful because it taught by inviting the other person to participate.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, George. Next up is Vanessa, Jeff, and Devin. Vanessa.
Well, I will say there actually is a golden ratio, being that there is one person that is either very aware or a good observer that not so much is guiding the conversation, but may realize it's because those be times they may just sit there and ask questions, like a little feedback. I can't believe you did this. And someone may say, my gosh, I've been talking for 20 minutes and you said all of maybe 7 words. And it's like, no, it's like, I'm so much enjoying what you're saying. And maybe I'm just directing you to either elaborate on something or retelling a memory. And even if you have a group of people, then maybe someone realizes, wait a minute, hold your point. We see you're excited. So if you have at least one person that, whether it's just is observing and not so much, okay, we got to talk about this now, but is aware of the situation and either can just make it that much more meaningful and deep. Even if it's with a stranger, you realize, wait a minute, they're really enjoying this. Or I may say, am I talking too much? Realizing, I'm like, oh my gosh, I love what you were saying. And speak about talking too much, I'll zip it. I think I got my point across.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. Next up is Jeff, followed by Devin. Jeff.
So Vanessa, I'll build on that a little bit. I actually think if a conversation at the basic level is defined as an interaction, it's all about the context. There are interactions where I want to sit for an hour and let a person tell me what they think. And I want them to present their best defense of it and their best extension of it into the future and their best assessment of what it's in response to and the questions that they think are most important. And I really want that. I really need it. They know incredibly important things with which I'm not familiar. And whether there's an opportunity for me to ask them questions afterwards or not. So, and then there are contexts where you want to hear from everybody in the room. You really need to hear from everybody in the room. And there are, by extension, sort of limitations as to how many people you can hear from, in a room. If there's 1,000, it's different than 10. So context is really everything. And basically the agreement between people regarding what this conversation is going to be about and who's going to play which roles, the conversation, in essence, in a way that's presented by actors for an audience, it's an interaction. But the audience is not going to stand up and ask questions unless that's the part of the improv game and it's built in. So, but if the audience just starts standing up and asking questions and that's not part of the design, it doesn't fit the context. And so there has to be adequate agreement regarding what the expectations are and what the norms are for the interaction. And then that defines how much time people are going to talk or who's going to ask questions or whatever it is. And that's my sense of it.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. I think the point about context is critical. There are times when somebody's speaking, they know so much more than me that I just want to listen. And when I'm doing that, I'm doing it actively in the sense that there are kind of questions in my mind. I usually am using, pen and paper or iPad to keep track of everything that is being said. And I do not hesitate to ask questions, but the full understanding that, okay, they really know this topic and I'm learning from them. And that's part, yes, that is part of the context. At the same time, if I think that somebody is going to benefit by me making a point, I will speak. And if there are contexts where I want to hear, you need to hear from everybody. That is there. And I think the most important thing is, see, I made this point in our conversation about conversations, that people come at conversations with multiple goals. The kind of conversation that we engage in here is joint exploration of the world, where everybody is just trying to learn something. And if somebody has something to teach you, then you listen. And if you find that you were wrong, you say, oh, thank you, I learned something. So there is that kind of a conversation. Generally, conversations where people are simply trying to just blurt out whatever is in their hearts and mind without regard to anything else and not really listening, that's not really a conversation. And that's not actually, I don't think of it as even speaking, because they're really not producing anything. It's not something that is, nothing is being produced by that. just this kind of, it's just an explosion of sound without too much in there. So those are my thoughts, but a great point about the context. Next up is Devane, Judy, and Rupali. Devane.
I'm a math and technology guy, so I tend to see the world in a fairly structurally rigid kind of way. And from the standpoint of communication as the transmission of my internal reality to you, then I was remembering something that I'd heard years ago. I hope I'm not doing this too poorly. But the idea is that there are 4 parts of conversation. There's the thing I'm actually thinking. There are the words I'm saying that I hope reflect the thing I'm saying. There are the words you're hearing, which I can't judge necessarily. And then there's the reality that you interpret from the words that you heard. And the value of a communication is, in a sense, the ratio, how closely the reality you've internalized matches the reality I'm meant to translate or to transmit. And so the part in the middle is, the rest of the conversation is, in a sense, negotiating on definitions, so that we can, so I send over an idea and you send back a reflection of that idea. And then I send over a correction of that reflection, and back and forth until we both believe that either sufficient frustration has been reached or actual understanding.
Wonderful. Thank you. I just wanted to build on that. In our conversation about conversation, Joe, Jeff, and I talked exactly about this technique of saying that whenever you're hearing something, especially complex thing from somebody, you repeat it back to them, not word for word, but as best as you put it in your own words. So saying, this is what I got from it. Is that correct? And then they will say, oh yes, this is correct. Or they will say, oh no, it's kind of correct, but you need to modify it. So there is like a handshake. And similarly, when you're saying something complex to somebody, I think you have to give an opportunity for them, in whatever way, you can say, was I clear? Or how do you see this? Or how would you phrase this? To get something back from them so that there is a handshake, especially on important things. It's critical to do that. We take words for granted, but we do not have access to each other's consciousness. Our consciousness, my consciousness is mine, your consciousness is yours. And it is important, if you want to make sure that the communication has actually happened, then there has to be this handshake. And then you're always watching for all kinds of cues of body language, the tone, the expressions, and all of that, to see if there is a problem that you need to deal with, or a confirmation. You're doing that both kind of at a body language level, non-verbal clues and cues. But a great point. Thank you. Next up is Judy, followed by Rupali. Judy.
Okay, I think that listening and hearing are confused sometimes. And also, I think that nobody really teaches us to listen. When we're babies, we're hearing, we're not really listening. Our mothers are talking to us all the time, and we are hearing. Then suddenly after a year, we say a word or two, and then everybody starts praising us because we said something. And then talking becomes the most important thing, not hearing anymore, not listening anymore. And then we go to school and nobody teaches us how to listen. They teach us the 3 R's, writing and reading and arithmetic, but nobody ever teaches us ever in any grade school to listen. High school, much less, I think. I don't know now, but when I was in high school, when I was in grade school, there were no classes anywhere on listening skills. Once you get to a corporate environment, like I have been working all my life, then you start teaching listening skills like to supervisors and to managers, if you're in the training department like I was. And then you teach like active listening and all these other things. And it so happens that when you listen, your blood pressure goes higher than when you're not listening. So it is a very active process, a brain process. So listening is very difficult to do. It's not easy. And you really have to pay a lot of attention of how you are learning to listen. That's basically what I wanted to say. There were other couple things, but that was basically it.
Thank you, Judy. Next up is Rupali.
Hi, Shrikant. Thank you. So two things. One is listening and speaking with adults and listening and speaking. The second part is listening and speaking with children. That's just because I work with children, so that comes to my mind. One thing is, as Judy said, the mother's always speaking to the children, and that's what the adults traditionally feel, that they should tell children what to do. And so I would say in terms of listening, if adults could slow down, I have learned a lot by just listening to children, and their imagination, their ideas, their thoughts, the way they look at things are very different. I was talking to my niece, and she said, children see things that adults don't see. And that was like a light bulb, because that's so true. We are in our own domain all of the time, and they are in their own domain. And so it's important when children are talking to just stop and listen. We don't have to always tell them what to do. So that's one thing about children. The second thing about talking with adults, speaking and listening with adults, I feel conversations, for me, there are two types of conversations. One is the mundane day-to-day, things have to be done, and there's activities that I have to do with my colleagues or my family. And that's like a really mundane conversation of what needs to be done. And so for that, I think there has to be a level of mutual respect, that we are in this together and everybody is trying to get things done. So listening for clarifying questions or instructions is important, so that you know what needs to be done. Now, the other part is listening for having a conversation to enrich my own life. So for that, 52 Living Ideas is a great example where we take turns and there's mutual respect. There's it to be able to learn something new and to enrich your life. I feel, for me personally, there has to be a level of curiosity, and listening offers that time to be curious and to ask questions. Like Judy said, it's an active process. It adds clarity by asking, while you're listening, you're thinking about, does this make sense? Is it aligned with my values? Is it different? Especially when the conversation is different from my perception. That's when I feel listening is an important piece of the conversation. And then when I speak, I feel the speaking has to be to share ideas and thoughts, not to have a gotcha moment that I know more than you, I'm smarter than you. I think that's a very much 7 to 12-year-old child who wants to prove that I know more facts than you do. So I think speaking and listening they go hand in hand, and there is a give and take. Sometimes it's 70-30, sometimes it's 30-70. I don't always think it's 50-50, because there's usually either you're learning or you're sharing your knowledge. Those are my 2 cents. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rupali. Next, let's go to the question that Kevin asked. Kevin, can you repeat the question?
Yes, my question about participation and sharing. So why is so important? Yeah. How about the brain? You know, if we add one more, how a brain come up play other than speaking and talking? Because and the end is above your brain. Thank you.
Okay. So about sharing. So how does this topic that we are talking about relate to sharing? What are your thoughts about sharing? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to talk about this. DLJ, what would you like to share?
Nicely done. I saw what you did there. Yeah, feedback loops, right? So you've got, because the conversation, if I put it in process terms, it's output, what we produce, and receiving, which is the input, right? So if we can create the loop so our output becomes input, then we've got something we can learn from. And we can't always do that on our own. So that's why we need that 360, you know, or feedback loops or reflection or looking in a mirror even, right? But you need that. So you can be sharing with yourself introvertly. But obviously the main feedback loop is the ridicule you get at school or the positive feedback you get at work or whatever it is. But that's essentially and then the ability to learn that lesson rather than to suffer from it, of course, is the other thing. So to take that yeah, I was going to quote Shakespeare there, but I couldn't remember the quote. So yes, to treat those imposters just the same. That was the thing.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, DLJ. So what do you think? What do you folks think about sharing? You know, the role of sharing in both kind of expression and listening. We go to Devane, Evanique, and Vanessa. Devane.
I just think that, again, I have a fairly mechanistic view of the universe. I think that just that sharing the communication is an evolutionary imperative. We're just built for it. We're social creatures. And the way we protect ourselves is by protecting each other. The way we extend our own lives is by creating a group around us that helps protect us. And we protect them, and that's the way it's been for 300,000 years, and it seems to be working tolerably well. You know, so there's no evolutionary motive to become. I'm always amused by people who think survival of the fittest means their personal survival, because it just doesn't. If the species fails, then the species is gone. But if I fail, the species can move on quite nicely without me.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Devane. Next up is Evanique, followed by Vanessa. Evanique.
I think the role of sharing is bringing yourself to the conversation. I think we were talking about this in on, you know, what makes a good conversation, that topic. And the thing is that one of the things we said is that you have to be interested in the other person. But another thing is that you have to be willing to bring yourself to the conversation. So when you're sharing yourself with that other person, and that creates relationship and that creates growth. And it also allows you to learn about yourself in the process of sharing yourself with another person.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Vanessa, Joe, and Rupali. Vanessa.
Well, just speaking, what I might be looking to get out of this by sharing something in the conversation, it may make it so much broader, and I may put something out there and it may prompt something else. Oh my gosh, I'm going to add this to it. I mean, think if you're in the kitchen or you're making a list of what you want to eat for dinner. So, oh, what, this dessert, or this goes well with this, or someone may say, try this spice. So you don't know what you're going to get out of it. Or even if you're like the observer on the timeline, by people sharing, it makes the experience that much more, it opens so much more possibilities.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback a little bit on what Dwayne was mentioned, you know, he talked about the how we're social in nature, and I agree with that. And I think that it helps create community. To be quite honest, is that when you're sharing information, you're sharing things about yourself, but it also gives you, you know, an important understanding of the world. So if you're thinking about what, kind of, I guess in Stoic terms, it would be something like the idea of knowing what is just. You're sharing, right? You have to share, you have to interact with other people to know what is actually, to get that information, to actually know what the right action is. And I think it's sharing is the fundamental, like underpins the idea of how do you build a community and build I mean, it's like a cosmopolitanism to a certain degree.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Rupali, followed by Kevin. Rupali.
Hi. So I think, when we share, the idea of sharing in conversation is even sharing our emotions. So Joe talked about building a community, and Joanne talked about, sharing knowledge. I think as human beings, when we have whether a sad occasion or a happy occasion, having conversations, having people to share that experience is important, because we are social animals. And to have a conversation when we are going through joyous times as well as difficult times with people who care is important. So yes, it's for knowledge too, but it's also for our mental well-being that we need to have conversations. I think we are very scared, especially when we're going through tough times, to share what we're going through with people, but to know that there are well-wishers who can share those emotions and help you in difficult times is important. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, throughout history, it's through conversations that we have evolved and learned to do better. And so a conversation between a mother sparrow and a baby sparrow is different from a mother human and a baby human. So we transmit a lot of knowledge to our young or to people around us when we are sharing, and we learn and evolve through that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Rupali. Next up is Kevin. Kevin, go ahead.
Thank you. I feel sharing it could be mutual benefit from it. It helps us feel motivated and valued, either from knowledge, information, even from joy and tear. So we can feel from either make our smarter feel and feel even feel the empathy. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. The deepest idea on sharing that I've ever come across is Carl Rogers' idea of authentic relating. So I'm going to take a minute to talk about this, because this is actually the same kind of approach that Carl Jung has. So Carl Jung and Carl Rogers on sharing. So just a small plug. Tomorrow we are doing a meetup on Carl Jung, on his most deepest work. It's the shortest and the deepest of his works. It's called the Seven Sermons to the Dead. We've got a number of Jungian scholars who are going to be coming to talk about it. And many of my friends who are really good, have been studying Jung for a long time. So, and this actually connects up with our study of Bhagavad Gita very well. So I strongly recommend. Joe, if you could put a link to the meetup on that, would appreciate that. Now, both Carl Jung and Carl Rogers held that human beings were magnificent creatures. At the core of our being, we are magnificent creatures. Yet, both of them wondered, why is it that so many people are so miserable? If that is the truth, if that is our true self, why is it that so many of us do not fully actualize that? And both of them, in their own way, they have different terminologies. Both of them said there are two reasons why that happens. First is that we have ideas that are self-defeating, that actually stop us. All kinds of fears, all kinds of wrong ideas about ourselves and others that stop us from expressing ourselves, of who we are, of becoming who we are. So these are the internal ideas that we have. And on the top of that, we have these shields to protect ourselves from others. You know, Jung calls it personas. There is all kinds of things, you know, people are afraid of others. So you have these magnificent creatures with this mechanism of undercutting themselves, wearing these giant shields, banging their head against one another. So what's the solution? And Carl Rogers says authentic relation, authentic relating is the solution, where this is the idea of Bhagavad Gita of saying namaste, where you're saying the God in me greets the God in you. You're trying to establish the connection with the deepest part. And when you are actually open to another person, something really deep happens, something almost magical happens, because you notice that they are different from you. Not that they don't have the problems of their own, but their problems are different from your problems. So you say, oh, this is what I think. They don't seem to think that. Is this really true, what I think? So it gives you a chance to correct your self-limiting ideas. And secondly, you realize that the shields are not really necessary. So the shields dissolve a little bit, and the virulence of this self-undercutting ideas goes down somewhat. And what that does is that it allows you to be who you are at the core. So authentic relating, and it just happens, it's mutual. The other person also benefits from it. So that I see as really the, you know, the most, the highest level I can see of sharing and growing. And you grow at the same time as the other person, both in their own way grow. So that's what, you know, that's what authentic relating is. Now, let's take one final question. And that is, what did you get from this meetup? What did you find most interesting about this meetup? What do you find surprising about it? Do you want to talk about, you know, answer the question, where is your stage? So it's like you can make any comments that you would like on that. So you can either ask the question, answer the question, where is your stage? What did you find most interesting? What new things did you learn from the meetup? Any comments, any closing comments you would like to make? Go ahead and type exclamation mark. We'll start with Joe.
Yeah, no, I think it was a fantastic meetup. I mean, I think it really kind of built nicely on our communication and a good conversation meetups as well. And I think it brought another dynamic to it. This, you know, the importance of participating. You know, we had spoken briefly. You know, a lot of people had spoken about voicing, you know, in our previous meetups. And I feel like in a way, participation is actually a way of voicing and expressing yourself. And I think that this really kind of helped us articulate what it means to really speak or to express ourselves. So this meetup in general, I think, was very beneficial in that regard. And I also think it, as I had mentioned earlier, it really kind of highlights in words and examples and practical examples that were outlined by Mike, the importance of it not being a spectator sport, even when we come to these meetups, why it's so important to participate. And it's an opportunity to get feedback. There's the other aspect of it is just kind of overcoming fear was actually, the way where, sometimes we're apprehensive, whether it be getting on the dance floor, trying something new, kind of overcoming that initial, and when we have real world examples, whether it be through dance, whether it be through improv or whatever it may be, I think that helps us, when we're thinking through these situations in our own lives or in situations we find ourselves in every day. So I think there are a number, it was good on a number of different levels. Thank you, Mike and Shrikant, as always.
Thank you, Joe. And I just want to say that, one of the things I really love about these meetups is the extent of participation of everybody. The extent to which, there are so many different comments and on so many different topics. So get to hear from so many different voices. And that enriches, Mike does this amazing presentations. And then after that, in breakout rooms, you have interaction, kind of speaking and listening. And then, in this discussion section, you have that too. So really, I'm always grateful for all the thoughts that everybody puts forth. Next up is Vanessa, George, and Evanique. Vanessa.
Yeah, like I said, this is a good topic. I like the discussion. And sometimes there's things I didn't even consider or new perspectives, and like how people even view the question and how they both answer and express themselves. And as far as for where's my stage, right in front of me. And that means either I'm on it or I'm like looking up at it. And I kind of consider the world itself a piece of art, like a living canvas. I mentioned in the breakout room how sometimes just pausing and watching the way a raindrop either falls off the tree and where it goes next, trying to guess, or the pattern it makes on the windows, just experiencing simple things. So it's like everything's a performance, even unintentional, like watching the kid interact and, kid doesn't even know you're there, just like the joy of it, even something miserable, like someone that can't sing to save their lives, but they're at least, enjoying it, and whether they're mocking it up and hamming it up, and it's like, hey, at least they're going for it. It makes life that much enjoyable, or at least less boring.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vanessa. Next up is George.
Yeah, I mean, Shrikant, I kind of like, this came to me when you were talking about Jung and Rogers, that like when we're sharing, when we're either consuming or presenting or expressing, we're hardwired biologically to seek pleasure, avoid pain. Our happiness and the happiness of others is supreme. So like, it's interesting that we talk about sharing over it. It's just interesting to kind of like to consider that the fundamental purpose of our sharing, of our listening and presenting, is the other person's happiness and our own.
Well, thank you, George. Next up is Evanique, Rupali, and Allison. Evanique.
Yeah, I thought the topic tonight was great. It was thought-provoking. I think it does tie into the conversations we had about, what is a good conversation. And I think I really like the question, like, what is your stage? It could be just, I almost want to like rephrase it as to say, what is your audience? Like, who is your audience? Because if you're on a stage, you're talking to an audience. So it's who is your audience? And it could be an audience of one where you're listening and you're getting so much out of it, or you're sharing yourself and the other person's getting something out of it. So I love the concept of give and take, and I also love the concept of, getting over your phobia, giving over your fear. Like Allison was saying, and that guy who got over his fear and got on a dance floor. It's like not being afraid to, I wouldn't even say fall on your face, but not being afraid of what other people think, just doing it anyway and just expressing yourself. So I got a lot out of what all the participants said. So it was great. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Rupali, followed by Allison. Rupali.
Hi, Shrikant. This was very helpful for me, this meetup. And I feel conversations are something that I do every day. All of us do that every day. And by having a conversation about conversation, I have become more conscious of how I interact with people, and how I can make my conversations more purposeful so that they are better shared experience with people I interact with. And the idea about participation in activities, the action that you take to support my conversations, my knowledge, it just reminds me that I need to stay active and do things and not just have, conversations, because then they're not supported. So then to wrap up with what is my stage, I would say at the fundamental basic level, it's my home, people around me that I converse with, my workspace, the place where I work. And then outwardly more my community with, doing workshops and things like that, or meeting with extended family. And then finally participating in meetups and podcasts and things like that, where I can share much more with a more global community. So that's my stage. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Joe, can I ask you to put a link to the first conversation that we did on the Wednesday, the last Wednesday conversation? Folks, and I don't think Rupali has heard that one, but folks, I mean, that conversation on conversation was just something. Like, just what we managed to cover in that was just incredible. It's one of the best conversations we've had on conversations. So I would recommend that if you have not already heard it. Allison, you're next.
Yeah, I think this was a great presentation, Mike. Thank you so much. And what I was going to say about dancing is this: just listen to the music, do whatever you feel like doing to it, and don't worry about anybody watching you, because who cares? Enjoy.
Well, thank you, Allison. Really appreciate that. The next up is Judy.
Okay, thank you again. It was a wonderful, and I really am sorry that I missed last Wednesday. Somehow I couldn't get in, or something happened. But if Joe can put the link, if I can hear it again, I would love that. So what I learned tonight is the fact that when I listen, I feel good. When somebody listens to me, it feels good too. So it's an act of love, it's an act of compassion, it's an intelligent action also, because you're putting a lot to it. You are investing yourself, you are believing in others, you are believing in yourself. So it's a very elevated type of activity, listening. And it just reaffirmed everything that I thought I knew about listening. So this was great. So thank you, Shrikant.
Wonderful. Now, Mike, this was fantastic. And I, just before the meetup started, I was talking to you about improv, and you have done one meetup on improv before. And I think, adding improv to, regular, like once a month or something like that, 252 Living Ideas would be a great way of doing this. Folks, tell me what you think. Mike actually knows a lot about improv. He's been doing it for some time. And we can go through kind of different improv exercises. They're going to be different kinds of exercises. Maybe Allison can do it, like get us to dance or something like that as well. In that as an improv thing. I'm sure there is improv dancing. But Mike, what are your thoughts?
It's real exciting, because it's not, when you hear improv, you'll immediately think, if you're not into it, that it's 50, I'm not 52. Whose line is it anyway on TV? More comedic improvisation, but there is so much more you can do. with exercise and with dialogue. You know, for example, we can all get together and you know, I can just say to all of you, okay, you are now the expert in Carl Jung, and you give us a 1-minute presentation about the shadow, except you're not really an expert on Carl Jung. You absolutely know nothing about Carl Jung, but you look everybody straight in the eye and you start to tell them about the shadow off the top of your head, and you do it convincingly. You might even do it with an accent to add a little spice to that. And so next thing you know, you have 18, 20 people looking at you, and these people know a great deal about the topic, yet you are improvising off the top of your head and telling them the truth about Carl Jung. Now, that's not funny on the surface, but it's extremely funny if it's done well. Now, what does it take to do well? Nothing. You start talking about something you don't know anything about, and you do it with a straight face. There's musical improv. There is poetic improv. There's limericks. It's almost endless. You can have a dialogue with a character, but it's only you in the box. You know, I can tell Evanique, I want you to create a character. Just a character that does not have your voice. You need to just change your voice a little bit, and maybe we'll prompt you and tell you a little something about that character. And you have very little time now to talk about, I don't know, give this person a name, Evanique. Just make it up.
Sarah.
Okay, tell me something a little bit quirky or special about Sarah.
Well, Sarah has a Southern twang and she loves peaches in the summertime.
So guess what you have to do? That's perfect. So do me a favor. Let's do it now for 30 seconds. I want you, Evanique, to have a conversation with Sarah about what topic, Allison? Give me a topic.
I have no idea, but my alter ego is Allie.
Oh, good. No, but you can't.
Allison is like, loves books, has glasses.
Excellent. But
does ballet. Allie has the heels.
You still have to give me a topic, though.
I don't know.
Just pick one off the top of your head, anything.
I don't know. 4th of July.
4th of July, Sarah and Evanique. Give me 45 seconds. Talk to each other.
Who, just me, I'm doing both.
You and Sarah, you're both characters.
So Sarah, how was your 4th of July? Well, my 4th of July was wonderful, honey. We had a nice picnic under the tree. We had a little moonshine, if you know what I mean. And of course, it was flavored with a little bit of peach. You know, Jerry over there got so drunk, he was climbing up the tree, honey. It was funny. Oh, he was climbing up the tree. Did he hurt himself? Because you know, he's like 60 or 70 now. You know, he can't climb like he used to. Well, honey, that liquor told him he could climb, honey, and he did. And not only did he climb, honey, it was hard. We thought we were going to have to get the ladder to get him down, but you know, his sons helped him out a lot. Really? Well,
Bravo.
Are his sons like in their 50s?
Beautiful. Beautiful, Evanique.
Wow.
So there's dozens and dozens of eyes like that.
Absolutely. And the simplest principle of improv that I like is the yes and principle. And just like I was in a park, was it yesterday? Day before yesterday, 4th of July, with a friend of mine, Zach, and we said, okay, he's also into improv. So I said, I want to see if we can have a regular conversation, not a made up conversation, but a real conversation, and use yes and. Okay. And so we started, and I was saying something, Zach was saying something, and then yes, and Jeff walked by in the park. So I said to Jeff, we are trying yes and as a regular part of conversation about conversations. What do you think about that? He says, we are loving it. He says, yes, and we walked for 45 minutes doing the conversation in that format of yes and, because it's a very powerful principle, because what you're doing is that you're actually listening to the person. You're saying This is what their experience is. And take that in and add something to it. It is magical. It is magical. It is magical in the like actual, in a comedic way, made up things. And it is magical in actual, just very simple conversation, direct conversation. So I really look forward to exploring all of that with Mike. All right, let's see. I think Rupali, you had a comment. Go ahead.
Yes, I love the idea of improv. We do it all the time at school with our students, and the benefits are amazing. So one is, first, like Mike said, people are initially shy, but then they learn to get out of their shell. The strategies that you talked about, yes and, or getting into a character, or having some quirk, or having a prop, it allows children to be creative and develop confidence. It sparks their imagination, and it does this for adults too. Like, we are so used to doing things that are the same every day because of our jobs and our lives, but it allows us to get out of our character and into a new character to learn something new. And what I found with children is many of our students have gone into acting careers. So when they went to college, they took some STEM field, and then they took a minor in acting or theater or drama or some sort of a creative outlet. So it allows you to be creative in a way that, you can have your STEM activity and then also engage your other part of the brain. The other thing is, we have been able to use these strategies in our school to resolve conflicts. So when you say yes and, you are working towards resolving a conflict. So the strategies that we teach in improv have actually become habits for children. So when they have a mental block in writing, we use improv strategies. We do small skits all the time in the classroom, and the children love skits instead of writing a 5-paragraph essay. Now from that skit, they can write a 5-paragraph essay. They learn to solve problems together. So when we have, at the beginning of the year in September, the teachers say, we are not telling you the rules, you're going to come up with the rules. And so it's yes and in a community meeting, and every child gets to say, and then together they figure out what their class constitution is going to be and what rules they're going to follow. And then they write it together. So improv, there are so many benefits, and if we can use it as part of everyday life, I think it's fantastic. So I'm all for it and looking forward to joining the improv meetup too.
Wonderful.
I just don't have enough time, Shrikant. What is this?
Wonderful. I'm glad that you can make it even if you're in India. So that's just fantastic. Thank you, Rupali. And what we will do is that we will up the thing. We'll say, what can 52 Living Ideas as meetups gain from improv? And we will pick those things that will kind of flow directly into, they'll give us a lot of benefit to everybody who's here. All right, folks. So Mike, great meetup. Thank you, everybody, for great comments. We'll see you soon. Bye, everybody. Don't forget the Jung meetup tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern time. Bye.